What's going on, guys? Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Amigoscode. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to use this amazing Python framework for building APIs. FastAPI was nominated as the open source Python library of the year. And to be honest, it's quite amazing because you can start building your own APIs in a matter of seconds. So it kind of competes with frameworks such as Flask and Django. And to be honest, it's quite cool. So in this video, what you're going to learn is how to create this entire API right here, where we're going to have a model called user, and the user will have first name, last name, middle name, gender, and a list of roles. And you'll see that this data then will store into a fake database, and you'll see how easy it is for us to build all of these HTTP methods: get, post, delete, and put, where the client will send a request. And then we basically have the server right here. So FastAPI uses the Uvicorn HTTP server, and it's very similar to Express.js and Node if you have done some JavaScript. And also it kind of competes with GoLand as well because it's an asynchronous server. So yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to have the client, and this could be any UI or any other application that wants to connect to your backend, and you're going to learn how to build all of this. So if I show you, and right here I'm going to issue a request to localhost 8000, and you can see that this is basically a JSON blob that we have, but also under, so in here under / and then API v1 users, have a look. So all of this is actually coming from our backend built with FastAPI. If you're new to my channel, go ahead and subscribe, give me a thumbs up so I can keep on recording these videos. So literally take 2 seconds and smash that like button so I can keep on recording these videos. If you're not part of the Amigoscode community, go ahead and join. The community is growing, and I would love to see you there, both on Discord and the private Facebook group. Without further ado, let's kick off this video. What exactly is FastAPI? Well, FastAPI is nothing but a framework for building APIs. It kind of resembles frameworks such as Express and others in the GoLand world, but basically what they're trying to do is to bring some of that good stuff from those frameworks into the Python world. So in here, you can see that they say it's very fast and high performance, fast to code. You can reduce about 40% of bugs in here. Very intuitive, easy, short, robust, and there is a set of standards already that you can just follow in order to build your APIs. So literally, as you see in this course, we're going to build a fully fledged API in a matter of seconds, and it's going to be really fast, hence the name FastAPI. So in here, in this main documentation, so here you can actually go and read more about it, some of the options, the installation process, so on and so forth. But I will come back to this in a second. Now, FastAPI is just a framework for building APIs. In order for you to serve your API, you need a server. So for that, it uses Uvicorn, and Uvicorn is the lightning fast ASGI server. And SGI stands for Asynchronous Service Gateway interface, and basically it's intended to provide a standard interface between async capable Python web servers, frameworks, and applications. So in this course, you'll see that we'll use Uvicorn under the hood, but in here, this is how you can install Uvicorn and configure the ports, and you'll see some of this stuff as well when we start learning about FastAPI. So right here, you see that they even have the logo right here. And what's really cool about FastAPI and Uvicorn is that they are ready for production. Literally, they are ready for production. If you want to build production grade applications that real users will receive traffic, you can definitely use FastAPI to build your products. Next, let's go ahead and install FastAPI, and you'll see how we're going to build an API in a matter of seconds. All right, let's begin our journey building this entire application right here, where we're going to use FastAPI and Python. So as I said, FastAPI is just a framework for building APIs, and we still need the Uvicorn HTTP server, which is a very lightweight asynchronous server for Python. So if I go back to the docs, and in here you can see that they have the installation process. So pip install FastAPI, and we also need to install the server right here, right? So for production, they recommend us to use Uvicorn or IPercorn, but we're going to use Uvicorn in this course. So let's together install FastAPI and Uvicorn and build a really simple API. So for this course, I'm going to use VsCode. So open up VsCode, and within VsCode, I do have this diagram, which you can find the link for the repo where you can find the source code, including this diagram. So it's this one that you are seeing right here. So let's together open up the terminal within VsCode. So new terminal, and to install FastAPI is as follows. So you say pip, and then I've got pip3, or you can just use pip and then install FastAPI. And I also want to install Uvicorn. So within quotes, I'm going to say Uvicorn. And then here, I want the standard. So this will bring the minimal dependencies for Uvicorn. So here I've got a typo. So this should be Uvicorn, just like that. Press enter. And there we go, successfully installed FastAPI as well as Uvicorn. Now let me close this terminal for a second, and in here I'm going to open up the Explorer, create a new file. This will be named main.py. Now within main.py, I'm going to say from and then FastAPI import and then FastAPI. Next, what I want to do is to create an instance of the application. So I'm going to say app equals to and then FastAPI. And if you've done some Express.js, this will look very familiar. Now, what I need to do is, let me just use this annotation. So I'm going to say at and then app.get. And this will give me a route for a GET request. So here I need to specify the path. So here I'm just going to say within quotes / so this will be the root. And then here I'm going to have a method, call it root. And inside is not going to take anything. And right here, I'm going to return this object or dictionary. And then I'm going to say hello. And then here I'm going to say world. And it's as simple as this. Now let me save this and open up the terminal. And to run the application, we say Uvicorn and then main : and then app. So main is the name of our module, so main.py, and then app is the instance of our application that we've just defined. And finally, what I want is to say -- reload. So if I make any changes, the server will reload automatically. So now press enter and have a look. So we'll watch for changes in these directories. So this is the directory that I'm working in. And then have a look. Uvicorn running on localhost 8000. And then at the very end, you can see application startup completed. So now what I can do is if I open up my web browser and in here, let me just say localhost and then 8000. Press enter and have a look. So this is quite cool. So I've got this JSON blob, which is hello and then world. So here, if I just close this, and if I change this to hello and then mundo, and then if I save this and then go back, reload, have a look. I didn't even had to stop and start the server because when we ran it, we told it to. So here we told it to, so have a look, we told it to reload. And to be honest, this is it. And you can see down at the bottom, we have the logs. So this was a GET request to the root and the status code was 200, which means okay. Before we move on, let me touch on HTTP request methods, and this will make sure that you understand exactly what you're doing moving forward. Now, HTTP requests defines a set of request methods to indicate the desired action to be performed for a given resource. So we have a list of them. So if I scroll down, and you can find this link under the description of this video. But have a look, we have a GET request, and this says the GET method requests a representation of the specified resource. Requests using GET should only retrieve data in here. So if I go back to VsCode, have a look. When we say app.get, so this right here is our GET HTTP method. And currently this is the path. So this is root, right? So localhost 8000. And then the data that we return is this JSON object that contains a key, hello, and then the value mundo. So if I go back to my web browser, what I want to show you is in here, if I right click and then inspect, and you can do this in any web browser, and go to network and reload the page and have a look what we have. We have status method domain file. Here, this is a GET request to localhost 8000, and this was the path, so /. I can click on it, and this gives me more information about it, right? So this was a GET request. The status was 200 OK. This was the HTTP version that was used. This was the response headers and request headers in here. I can have a look at the cookies, the request, but more importantly, if I click on response, we have the JSON object in here. So if I click on raw, so if you don't have the JSON extension, you might see something like this, but this is the response which was sent by the server. So this response in here. So this is pretty much how it works. And something which is really important is, so if I go to headers, have a look, the status is 200, which means okay. So if I change this to / and then foo, enter, so we have the status 404, so meaning that it's not found because we haven't configured this route just yet. So if I close this, and if I go back to localhost 8000, we have hello mundo. So this is a GET request, but we also have other HTTP methods. We have head, so asks for a response identical to a GET request, but without the response body. Post, this is used to submit an entity to a specified resource. So you learn about post. Put is used to replace all current representations of a target resource. So usually this is used for updating data in your backend. Delete. The delete method is used to delete a specified resource. Connect, options, trace, patch, so on and so forth. So I'm going to leave a link where you can read more about this, but it's very straightforward. And in this course, we're going to cover the most important ones, which are get, post, put, and delete. Before we carry on, let me still teach you about an important concept that you should really be aware when working with FastAPI and Uvicorn. So as I said before, the ASGI specification, and if I click on this right here, so this takes me to this documentation, and SGI stands for Asynchronous Service Gateway Interface right here, and is intended to provide a standard interface between async capable Python web service frameworks and applications. Now, what this means is, if I open up VsCode, so if you are aware of the async await keywords in either JavaScript or Python, then you will understand this. Sometimes we want to have this method to be able to wait for an asynchronous computation. So the way we do it is by using async, and then let's say here we have to wait for an HTTP request. So we can say await, And then here, this is like foo, for example, right? Now, obviously, we don't have this method foo that will go off and get some data from the internet using asynchronous fashion. But if you want to use the await keyword inside of your methods, you need to have this keyword before the def keyword for your methods. Now, this is really important, and this is why this right here is an asynchronous service gateway interface. Now, inside of the documentation for FastAPI, they have a section on concurrency and async await. So I'm going to leave this link where you can basically go and read more about it. But async await is not something that we're going to fully cover in this course, but I just want to make sure that you are aware of it so that when you see the async keyword used in methods, then you know what it means. So for this course, we're not going to need the await inside here, maybe later, but at this point, I'm going to use the async keyword for all of my methods. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Otherwise, let's carry on. All right, so for our application, we want to be able to store a list of users into our database and then expose the API so that we can get users by ID, delete users, update users, so on and so forth. So this is the model that we want to have. Right here, you can see all the attributes for the user ID, first name, last name, middle name, which is optional, gender, and a list of roles. So let's together define this in our application. So back to VsCode, and in here, let's create a new file, and I'm going to name this as models.py. And for this course, we're going to use Pydantic. So Pydantic is a Python library to perform data validation. We can declare the shape of our data as classes with attributes. So let's define our class. So in here, let's just say class. This will be user, and this will extend base and then model. And in order for us to use base model, we have to import. So let's say from py and then dantic import base and then model. Now inside of our class, we can define the attributes. So I said that we want an ID, and the ID will be optional. So let's just say optional. And this will give me the import from typing optional. And finally, the data type for this will be a UID. And you could choose, for example, an integer if you wanted to, but in my case, I'm going to say UID. And if it's not provided, I'm going to say UID and then v4 right here, and make sure that you have the correct imports. But VsCode is adding these for me. Next, I want to have the first name, and this will be a string. Let's do the same for last name. I also want to have middle name, and this will be optional. And finally, I want to have the gender, and this will be an enum. So let's just have that. So this we need to import. So from enum, import, and then enum. And now I can say class, and this will be gender. We need to pass the string and then enum type. And this will have two values. So male equals 2, and then male, and followed by female. There we go. Now to use it, we just say gender in here. So this is our type. And let's do the same for roles. So a user can have one or more roles. So here, this will be roles instead of, role instead of gender. This will be admin, and then maybe you want the user role, and maybe you also have a student role. But this really depends on the type of application that you are building. There we go. And to use the role, we need to say roles. So this will be a list of type and then role. And we need to import list right here. From typing, we also want the list. And it's as simple as this. So now that we have our model right here, and we actually are using Pydantic, and if you want to learn more about Pydantic, you can follow this link where you can learn more about the data validation and the settings that you can use. But basically, we haven't done much in terms of validation, but you can use Pydantic to do all kind of things to make sure that you enforce the correct validations. So what we have now is we have our user right here that we can now store in our database and use it as a data store for our application. Next, let's build this database right here, which we're going to start off with a list. But if you want to change to a real database, that will be really straightforward as well. Next, let's go ahead and build our database that will store the list of users. So we have the user model. Now let's build this database where we can store users. So let's go back to VsCode. And in here, I realized that instead of models.py, line 16 for the IDE, we need to invoke this guy right here. So just like this. So we invoke so that we get a UID if it's not provided. Now let's open main.py, and inside, after the application, so line 3, let's go ahead and have the database. So I'm going to say DB, and this will have a type of list, and I'm going to import list, and the type of the list will be user, and also import user, and this will contain a couple of users inside. Whoops, not warning, but users. So if I just scroll up, have a look, we have the imports. So list from typing and models from users. So this is the user that we've just created. Now inside, let's have a couple of users. So here, I'm going to say user, and inside, let's have one male and one female. So here, I'm going to say ID, and then this will be UID, and then version 4. Let's invoke this. Let's also define the first name equals to, and let me put this full screen. There we go. So this will be Jamila, and the last name will be Ahmed. And let me put these on new line. So this is much easier for you to read. Now here, let's define the gender equals to, and then gender dot, and then female. And I'm missing a comma here. So female, and we need to import gender. So from here, we import gender, and we also need roles. So here, let's just say that Jamila, she is a student, right? So we have roles. Have a look. Admin, user, and student. So here I can say square brackets, and inside I'm going to say role dot, and inside we have student, and I need to import role as well, just like that. And there we go. So let's have a comma here, and let's have a second user, and this will be Alex, and then Jones, and he's a male, and let's say that Alex is an admin and also a regular user. So dot, and then user. So you can fine tune these roles to according your application, but here I'm just trying to demonstrate how to use a list. And there we go. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that the ID will change every time you restart the application, but that is fine. We're going to fix this in a second. So this now is our database. Have a look. So we have the database. It's a list of users, and currently it contains 2 users. So let me also remove this comma, and we are good to go. Next, let's define a route to give us all the users that we have in this list and expose it to our clients. All right, so we have the database, which is currently a list. We also have the model. Now let's have an endpoint where clients can send a GET request, and we're going to use FastAPI to send data that we have stored in our list. So let's open up VsCode, and in here, so you've learned about HTTP methods. So again, we need the GET method. So here, at, and then app, dot, and then get. And here we need to specify a path. So let's say /API/v1/ and then users. Now let's have the async and then def fetch users. And inside, we're not going to pass anything. And now we can say return and then DB. So basically, we're just returning all the contents in our DB. So basically, it's a list of objects. Now let's test this. So I'm going to save this and then open up the terminal and have a look. The application reloaded and started completed and started successfully. Now, if I open up my web browser, and here before, remember, we have localhost 8000 and this says hello mundo. And if I reload, this still works. But now if I say / and then API/v1/ and then users, press enter, have a look. So we get an array of objects. And here, check this out. We have ID. So this is a random string or a UID. First name Jamila, Ahmed, female, and then roles. She is a student. We have Alex. So have a look, Alex Jones. The gender is male and he has 2 roles. So you can see that this is really cool. Now, the reason why my output is formatted like this is because I'm using an extension for Firefox. So here, I think it's called JSON Viewer. So I think it's this one here. And basically it formats the output as you see in here. So go ahead and install this, and it's also available for Chrome, Opera, and other web browsers. But to be honest, this is it. So you can see that this is really cool. Now, one problem that we have is, check this out. So this ID ends with 6D. Now, if I add a space and then save this, and then go back, reload, have a look, the ID will change. So now it's 6.2. So what I want to do is to have these IDs fixed. So I'm just going to grab this string, go back, close this, and in here, so instead of us generating the UID like this, let's just say UID, and then inside we can pass the UID as a string. Let me get the other ID, Command C, and then instead of generating each time, I'm going to say UID and then pass the ID inside, save this. If I go back, now if I reload, check this out, the IDs are fixed. And to be honest, this is it. So you've successfully managed to expose an endpoint that gives you back a list of users. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Otherwise, let's carry on. Okie dokie. So we've managed to send a GET request into our API and we get back a list of users. Now, how do we add a new user? So in here, let's together have yet another API endpoint, and the whole purpose of it is to add a new user. So after the app.get, so let's have yet another endpoint. So we're going to say app dot, and then if you recall from the HTTP video, so if I show you again in here, so we have get, which is used to retrieve data. We have post, submits an entity to the specified resource, often causing a change in state or side effects on the server. So here, the resource is the endpoint that we're going to define in a second. And then it submits an entity. So we want to submit a new user. So let's do that. So here I'm going to say post, and the resource is the same in here. So you can have the exact same resource because the methods change. So this is a get and this is a post, but they live under the exact same path. So now inside, I'm going to say async def and then register underscore and then user, and this will take a user. So I'm going to say user, and the type of it will be user. So the user that we've defined. Now this user is the entity, and this is basically what we received from the request body. And I'm going to show you this in a second. So now what we want to do is just say db.append, and we want to append the user. So the user that is sent, and as we know, the ID is generated, and what I want to do is return, and here I'm going to say user underscore ID, and then, oh, actually, let me just say ID. So ID, and this is equal to user dot and then ID, just like that. So we basically register a new user, and then we send to the client the ID for that user. So now that we have the post request, we can't really test post requests by using our web browser. So from our web browser, we can only send GET requests. Next, let's learn how to send a post request to our API. Right, we have our method that takes the user from the request body and adds it to our database, and then it returns the ID back to the client. But as I said, we can't really test post requests with our web browser. Well, we have two options. One is, so if I go to plugins, so in here, or extensions, I can search for REST and then client. So here we have a bunch of REST clients, and this one called Thunder client is one which recently came out, and it has 5 stars, so people seem to love it. So we can install it. There we go. And in here, if I close this, I should have the client here. So I've just clicked on these 3 dots and then Thunder and then client. And my font is actually quite big, so that's why you can't really see it. So if I just make it smaller, there we go. And let me increase the font right here. So now you can see that we have the Thunder client, REST client. So if I click on it, now I can send a request. So have a look, I can say new request, and basically I can send a post request, get request. So have a look, get, post, put, delete. So let's just send a get request into our application so that you see it works. So here I'm going to say http / local host 8000 /API /v1 /users. And if I send, have a look, we get back a JSON or an array of objects. So this is the exact same thing that you see in here, but now we are using this REST client. But we can also send a post request. So the post request looks like this. So we have to copy one of these objects, and here let's just say new request. This will be a post, and the URL will be the same. So http v1 and then users. And now inside of the body in here, this is the JSON content that I want to send to my server. So if I paste that and remove that comma there, so this now is the JSON object that I'm going to send. So let me just make this bigger like so you can see everything. And right here, so remember from our model called user, we don't have to send the ID. So I'm just going to remove that. And here, let's think about someone. So here, let's just say Rita and then Oliver. So I'm just thinking about random names. So Anna, just like that. And right here, she's also a student. So this is the payload, which is going to be sent to our server. Now, this right here is the request body. So this is the request body. So have a look, body, right? And then the format of it is JSON. Now, remember, so in here, in our main.py, have a look. So let me just collapse this for a second. Have a look. So this right here accepts a user. And this is what comes from the request body. So the user has to have the exact same shape as our model right here. So ID, which is optional, first name, last name, middle name optional, gender, and a list of roles. Now let me go back to this request and I can just say send. Now watch what happens. I send the request and we have a status code. So 200 means okay. So this means that we successfully added this resource or this entity to our database. So if I open up Thunder client, let's send a GET request. So I'm just going to use this one here. And before, so this was the response with 2 users. So I've looked 2 users. But now if I send the exact same request, there we go. Now watch, we have Jamil Ahmed, we have Alex Jones, but we also have Rita, Oliver, Anna, she's a female, and a student. So this was really cool. So you can see that how we used this client to send a post request. The body was this JSON object. Then in our endpoint here, so if I collapse this once more, we got the user from the user body, and then we added to our database. And it seems like I accidentally removed this return ID and then user ID. So let's just add it back. Let me save this and let me just go back in here. And if I send a GET request, so you can see that I only have 2 users because every time the application restarts, I lose the data. But now let me send the post request. So Rita again, send, and now have a look. So 200, but in the response, we have ID and then the ID that was generated for Rita. Now let me send the request again to get all users and have a look. We have Rita in here. So this is pretty cool. If you have any questions, drop me a message. Otherwise, let me show you yet another way that we can interact with our API. So as you saw, Thunder client is really cool and powerful, and we can basically interact with our API through VsCode, right? So let me just, for now, just close this tab and this tab. And what I want to show you is yet another powerful way that we can interact with our API. So if I open up my web browser, and in here, you saw that this is our data coming from the backend. And if I reload, I think, yeah, we do have Rita in here, and that's because I haven't restarted the server. So in here, go ahead and remove API and then v1 users, and then type / and then docs. Now check this out. So here you can see that we have this interactive API documentation, which is provided by Swagger. And this is given to us by default, right? So whatever endpoints we have, it will generate the documentation for our API. Now, what's really cool about it, and let me just zoom out a little bit. So here, let's check this out. So here we have default, and this is because we can actually group these routes, but currently we're not. So we have root / we have API v1 users, which is a GET request. We also have POST request that allows us to register a user. And right here, we have the schemas. So we have gender, role, and user. And we also have HTTP validation error and validation error, which are given to us by default. So if I open up user, it tells me the properties of a particular user and what fields are required. So first name, last name, gender, and roles are required, and ID, middle name are not. So you can see that this is really powerful. Now, I said this is an interactive API documentation. What do I mean? Well, if I click on get, have a look. It says it takes no parameters, the responses, media type, and right here, and it has an example value with schema. But what I want to show you is I can click on try it out, and then I can say execute, and now have a look. So this was the curl request that was generated. So if you were to take this curl request and paste it in your terminal, this would give you back a list of people, and you can see the request URL. But more important, have a look, 200. And then we have the response body, and we have 3 people. So we have Jamila, Alex Jones, and Rita Oliver. So you can see that this is really cool. So if you want, you can interact with your API this way. Another way that you can view the documentation for your API is, so here, let me just collapse that. And this is actually given by default, right? And it's interactive. So I didn't show you actually. So let's try and post someone. So it gives me the example here, but let me just say, try it out. And the ID, I'm going to remove it just like that. And then first name, I'm just going to give things as default for now, and then just say execute. We have the curl that was generated, the request URL, and then 200. This was the response body. So this is the ID that was generated, and you can see that it works. So now I can collapse this, say get all users, execute, and then check this out. So here now we have 4 users. So we have this one right here, which was the last one. Now, finally, what I want to show you is, so this is the interactive documentation provided by Swagger, but we also have Redoc. So Redoc is just the API documentation. It's not interactive. So have a look. We have all the endpoints. So root, fetch users, register user, and basically my font is quite big, but if I just make it smaller so you can see, have a look. So it gives me root, fetch users, and then register user, and it gives me the schema. Have a look, first name required, last name, so on and so forth, and it gives you back the responses. You can have a look at the payload. You can copy the payload, and the URL is right here. And you can also download this Open API specification. So this is really awesome. So there we go. I've just showed you 2 ways that we can interact with our API. We can use this one right here, or we can use within VsCode Thunder client. And to be honest, they are both the exact same thing, but this one has a bunch of more information about your API. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Otherwise, let's build another API endpoint. We can get all users. We can add users. Now let's learn how to delete a user from our database through the API. So let's open up VsCode, and in here, let us say at and then app dot, and then delete. So let me show you in here, HTTP, we have delete used to delete a specified resource. Now the way that we're going to delete a resource is as follows. So inside, let's have the exact same path. So let me just copy this just like that. But instead, what I want to do is say / and then curly brackets and then user underscore and then ID. Now, this is a path variable, and I'm going to show you this in a second. So now let's have async def and then delete user, and this will take the user underscore ID. The type of it is a UID, and let's have the following logic to delete a user. So here, what we need to do is to loop through our database. So I'm going to say for and then user in and then db if user.id equals to the user ID, which is passed by the path variable. If this is the case, then what I want to do is say db dot remove and then pass the user. And it's as simple as this. Now I need to return. So this basically comes out of the loop as soon as we find the user. Now there is something else that we have to do here, but I'm going to cover that in the next video. But for now, let's just save this and let's learn how to delete a user. So here, let's use the Swagger docs. So here, let me just reload, and you can see that we have delete. Let me make this bigger, and let's fetch all the users. So try it out, execute. So we have 2 users, right? Let's try and delete Alex. So let's grab this ID, Command C, and let me collapse this, delete, and it gives me the parameters. So have a look. I need to specify the user ID. So I'm going to say try it out, pass the user ID, and now execute and have a look. So this was the curl command, but have a look at the request URL. So localhost 8000 API v1 users / and this is the path variable, and this is the ID that we get from here. This is the ID that we get from here. Now you can see also we have a 200 status code. So if I basically get all users, so get execute, you can see that now Alex is gone and we only have Jamila in our database. Let me show you how to do the same with Thunder Client. So here, Thunder Client, and I'm going to say new request. This will be a delete, and we need the path. So API v1 users, and I need to get the ID for Jamila. So let me just get, there we go. So that's the ID. And let me go back to this new request, paste it in, and then send 200. Let's get all the users, send, and have a look. No one is in our database because we deleted everybody. Now, one thing which is not working quite well, that is if I come back here for a second and I try to delete. So I try to delete the same person, so with the same ID, send, have a look. This is telling me that it's okay, 200. But I know for a fact that we don't have anyone in our database, right? So we need to handle this scenario in here. And that's what we're going to learn next. So you've just saw that if I send this delete request, this will always return a status code of 200 saying that the request indeed worked. Well, that is true, but that is not really what we want to do, because with HTTP, these status codes, they represent something. So in here, let me show you. So in this link, which you can find under the description of this video, it says HTTP response status codes and indicates whether a specific HTTP request has been successfully completed. And right here, it's grouped into 5 classes. So informational, which is between 100 and 199, successful, 200, 299, redirection, 300, 399, client errors, 400, and 499, and then we have server errors, which is 500 and 599. So this is when something happens. So this is when something goes wrong in our server. This is when the client sends a bad request, for example, and this is for success, as you've seen, 200. And if I scroll down, so you can see that it's telling me all these requests, so what they mean. So have a look. Successful responses, 200. The request succeeded, and it gives you more information. But what I want to show you is, so if I scroll down, we have 400 client error responses. So the server could not understand the request due to an invalid syntax. So this is a 400. 401, so this is unauthorized. So probably you've seen this. And we have 403, which is forbidden. But maybe you've seen this one quite often. 404, not found. The server cannot find the requested resource. So in our case, we know that this user is no longer present in our system. Therefore, we should return a 404 back to our client saying that the user cannot be found. So how do we do that with FastAPI? Let's carry on the next video. So let's go back to VsCode and let me just open up. So I'm going to close this tab and I'm going to open up main.py, put this full screen, and right here, so you saw that if we find the user, we delete the user right here, and then we return. So return means just pretty much exit out of this function. Now, what I want to do is, so after the loop, if this condition is not met, I want to raise a HTTP exception, and we have to import HTTP exception from FastAPI. So here, HTTP exception, and I don't think we need this UID, so let's just get rid of it. And if I scroll down, so here inside we have to pass a couple of things. One is the status code, and this is a 404, comma, and then the detail. So this is the message that the client should see. So in our case, I'm going to say F, and then I'm going to say user with ID, column, and then pass the ID. So user ID does not exist. And if I save this, so you can see that this now makes more sense, right? So if the user doesn't exist, then we should tell the client what has happened instead of just saying every time, okay, that your request was deleted. So now if I open up this tab and if I send this delete request, have a look what's going to happen. So instead of 200, now we get 200, and that's because the server restarted. Therefore, we have the data back. But now if I send it a second time, check this out. So you can see that user with ID, and then this is the ID, does not exist. And this time we have a 404 not found. So this is exactly what we want. So I'm going to leave this link for the HTTP status codes so you can go and read more about them. But really all you need to remember is that there are 5 categories. So in here, informational, success, redirection, client and server responses. This is all for this video. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Otherwise, let's carry on. Okie dokie, so time for your very first exercise. So you've seen that FastAPI is really straightforward and awesome, and you can build APIs in a matter of seconds. Now I want to challenge you where I want you to implement the put method. And put method allows you to update an existing resource in your database. So what I want you to do is go ahead and create a model that allows you to update the first name, last name, middle name, and roles, and make sure that all of them are optional. Then create a new route with @app.put, and then using the same path that we've been using, and then receive that model, and then go ahead and write some code that if any of those fields are not none, then update the existing user, right? And also you need to make sure that you use path variables. I'm going to leave the instructions under the description of this video so that you can follow along, but go ahead and challenge yourself, and I'm going to give you the solution in the next video. All right, so for this solution, what I've gone ahead and done was I created this class called the user update request that extends base model, and first name, last name, middle name, and roles are optional. Then inside of main.py, I do have this method called update user, and the annotation that I've used was app.put, the same path for the other ones, and here I've got a path variable. Then I take the user update, and the class is user update request, and also the user ID from the path. Then what I do is I check whether the user is in our database. So using a for loop in here for user in DB, if the IDs match, then all I'm doing here is I'm checking whether the update.firstName is not none. So if that's the case, then we update the first name. I do the same for user update last name, middle name, as well as the roles. And at the very bottom, line 61, I do return because everything was fine. Otherwise, if the user is not found, I just raise HTTP exception, passing the status code 404 and the detail message user with ID does not exist. Now let's test this out. So here, make sure that you have Uvicorn up and running. So if I open up the terminal, I'm going to run this command because I stopped the server, and let me close this. Now let's open up FastAPI and let's test this out. So new, and let me just copy the request from here. So I'm going to grab all of this, and if you don't remember, so if I do a get request send, you can see that we have two people, right? So let's update Jamila Ahmed in here. So let's basically go to this new request, and let me paste that and change get to a put. This is Jamila's Ahmed right here. So ending 562, 562. Now the payload that I need to send to my new request is this one, user update request, first name, last name, middle name, and roles. So let me just copy this object in here, Command C, and I'm going to go back to this tab, and inside of body, I'm going to paste this. And for Jamila, so right here, let me just put this bigger, and I don't need to pass the ID. So gender as well. And here, let's just give her a middle name. So let me just say hello, for example. So you see that it's been updated. And for the roles, let's also give her admin. And let's just remove first name and last name right here. And now if I send this request, so let's send it and have a look. We have a 200 status code, which means okay. And in here, if I now get all users, you can see that we changed Jamila middle name. Before was null, now it's hello. And also have a look at the roles, right? So she's a student as well as an admin. So let's also change Jamila Ahmed to, so here, instead of saying Jamila Ahmed, we'll just say we want to update the, let's just say last name, just like that, to Ali, for example. Send, and then go back, and then have a look. We updated the last name. So you can see that this is working beautifully. Also, if I basically change this to 3, we should get a 404. Have a look, 404, user with ID ending in 563 does not exist. And also, if I add in a comma here, and let me just say 2, and then send this. So 442, so this is a bad request from the client. So the range is within 400, so 422. And you can see that this is working beautifully. If you have any questions getting this far, please do let me know. Otherwise, you can grab the source code from the description of this video. That's all for now. Catch me on the next one. I hope that you made this far. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. Next week, what I want to do is I want to build the front end for this API. So you'll see how to build a fully fledged full stack application using FastAPI as well as React. Also, you saw that in here, we kind of have a database, which is a list, but with what you have, you can take the code and then change it to connect to a real database. So I'm going to leave a link where you can go and learn about Postgres. So I've got a 4-hour course on Postgres, and I'm also going to leave a link where you can learn how to integrate FastAPI against a real database. It should be really straightforward. If you want to gain a certificate for this course, go ahead and enroll on my website, where I'll give you a certificate for free where you can show to employers. If you're not part of the Amigoscode, please go ahead and join the communities growing both Discord and the private Facebook group, and let me know what other videos that you want to see from this channel. And this is all for now. I'll catch you on the next one. Assalamu alaikum.